Hey guys, welcome back. This is another video on me creating a Node application using the sequelize ORM. My name is Kyle, and let's jump into it. So in the last video, if you have been following so far, we created a route which allows for a user to refresh their login if they have a cookie available to them. Now that we've set all of that up, one, I first wanted to say congratulations, because what you have set up until this point could really be used over and over and over again as a basic template for um, for different projects. So if you were to take what you have right now and saved it, you actually have a really good starting point for a lot of different projects. But after this point, we're kind of going to get really specific to this project because that all projects require that at some point. So in this video, we are going to be creating courses. So we want to start getting courses, but we can't really get courses unless we've already created them. And that might seem obvious, but I've run into a lot of people who would be like, well, we would like this information displayed here. And you kind of have to just sit back and say, oh, you would you? Well, how is that information going to get there to begin with? Um, so before we can actually get the courses, we obviously have to create them. And in order to create them, I just kind of jotted down a little bit of what we will be doing. I like writing down what I am going to actually do because I find that if you kind of just jump into your editor and immediately start trying to suss out, you're going to cover a lot of ground and then realize that you didn't need to cover that ground and go back. So don't do that. When we last looked at our course database schema, it looked a lot like this. I apologize. I think I'm losing my voice a little bit. It looked just like this. It was a single table. We're not going to deal with sections at the moment. We're just going to deal with this one course table. And we can connect courses to users by this user courses table, but we're actually not going to worry about this user courses table just yet because I'm much more focused on the admin side of things right now than the student side. So this is what we had, but that is actually going to turn into this. So notice that we have added a description and a status. So it's no longer, oh, we didn't add a description, sorry. We added a status, so it's no longer just a title and a description. And we also added a user ID. That way we can say who actually created this course. But one thing that we want to do that's different from that previous page is I want to have a list of edits to a course. So if someone changes something about a course, there's a record of that change. So we'll also be creating this table called course history. Now, forewarning, I am breaking some rather basic database rules here by creating two tables with the exact same data. But I will explain why I'm doing that in just a second. So anytime we create a course, we're going to create the course here, but we're also going to have this course history table, which has all of the same information, except it also has this version field. Okay, and if we ever want to know what is the most current edit, we can just look at what's the highest version. So if we look at the requirements that I laid out here, first off, we're going to call this route just courses. And it's going to be a post route, and it's going to take in these body parameters. So title, description, and status. Okay, course titles should be unique in the fact that I don't want two courses that are named the exact same thing. The course status should be one of the following. So draft is, you can kind of think of this as almost like a blog post. We're very familiar with blog posts. So a draft is, hey, I'm working on this, but I haven't actually completed it yet, so it's not going to be viewable by students. Published is, okay, students can see this, and if they want to, they can enroll. And hold is, yes, it's been published, but for some reason, I don't want it to be visible anymore. You could also think of this as like unpublished. Ooh, I actually like that. Unpublished. That makes more sense than hold. So unpublished, in other words, it was published at some point, but now I've decided it's either retired or archived or something like that. And then courses should have a version number that is 0 or +1 the previous version. Okay, so we're going to count from 0 here. We're not going to count from 1. So whenever we create a course, its version is by default going to be 0. And anytime we update a course, we're just going to increase that version number by 1. Courses should have an entry of what user created them or edited them. I really did this because when I originally kind of thought this up, I didn't really take into account that there might be I don't have it. I didn't really take into account that there might be curators. It was always just admins or students, and I thought to myself, well, I'm going to be the only admin, so I don't need to keep a course history, but if there's other people who are creating courses or editing them, uh, there needs to be some kind of history of that, in my opinion. So courses should produce a duplicate entry of all fields in the history table. All right, and then here we have for the get requirements, it's going to be courses, it's the get route. It's going to produce an entry or an array of JSON objects, and each course should have the following properties: title, description, and status. So we will flesh out that get more. But what I wanted to talk about is why I'm creating a duplicate here. So in a perfect world, to completely normalize this, we actually wouldn't have anything in this course table except a course history ID. So what we would do is I would put a foreign key in this table that says, or that points to the highest version of that course. And obviously the reason to do that is because we don't want to have duplicate information. This course entry is basically a duplicate of whatever entry was put in this course table. But as anyone who ever has denormalized a database knows, sometimes you do things for sake of speed. I don't want to have to go from the courses table to the course history table every single time I want to get a list of courses. And this might actually be a quite frequent thing to get lists of courses because it's, well, actually, no, it's going to be a quite frequent thing. It's the main purpose of the application is to get courses. So that being said, I'm just going to duplicate it here. There's probably someone out there who greatly disagrees with this and thinks, no, it should be normalized and you shouldn't be duplicating data like that. I don't think that this is particularly a bad case of it. All right, so the first thing we need to do is create these two models. And just a quick side note, I did want to say this because someone might notice it. I am no longer using localhost for my project. I have moved to AWS. I'm using one of their databases so that I can move between computers if I need to. Same database setup, so don't worry about if you're using localhost. Like I said, I just am using AWS from now on. Okay, so we will go into our editor and let's go to our models folder. So we have users and permissions right now. We're going to create a new model. So we'll create a new JavaScript file, and I'm going to call this just courses. And I'm not a big fan of copy pasting things, but I'm going to do it in this particular in this instance because I don't want to write out everything I have to do. The only thing I am going to do is obviously delete everything except for, so I'm going to delete all of this. The only thing I'm then left with are these three keys: the ID, the updated at, and the deleted at. Okay, and then obviously I'm going to change this. I shouldn't say obviously. I'm going to change this to an integer instead of a UUID because I don't expect there to be a large amount of courses. I mean, maybe there's a couple, dozen, but hopefully, it never exceeds 1 million. I think I would have outdone the Library of Congress. Okay, so integer. Come on, autocomplete. No. Okay. So data types dot integer. And again, if you do need a refresher on the data types that are available to you, just go to the sequelize documentation, and under data types right over here on the left, it's going to tell you all of the data types that you have. So we see right here is our integer. If I can highlight it. So right there is the integer, but you might want to do something like float or who knows what. So let's go back in. Primary key true, and then we don't want to give it a default value. So instead of a default value, we want to say auto increment. Okay. And we'll say that's true. So that means it'll start at 0 and it will just continue moving upwards, or I think it actually starts at 1. I don't think it starts at 0, and keeps moving upwards. So we want it to have an ID. The next field that we want it to have is a user ID, and this is going to be a foreign key from the user table. So just like we did in permissions, or not permissions, in the user table, we did this where even though the sequelize ORM is going to auto-generate this permission ID column for us, we put this in our model. And I'm going to do the same thing in here for the user ID. That way it's very clear to someone looking at this model that there is a user ID in this table. So we'll say user ID, and I'm going to put a comment up here that this is a foreign key from the user table. And then we will say type, and remember that we need to match the type of the user ID. So if we go back to users, we see that the type was datatypes.uuid. So we will copy that. I'm going to delete that and say type equals datatypes.uuid. All right, and that's really all we need. I am going to say required equals true, and allow null is false. There's no reason that this should ever be null. So unlike the users table, oh, that's going to annoy me. All right, let's stop this server for a second. Unlike the users table, if we look at, okay, so password and username. We said allowed null is true here because we were anticipating that if this user ever gets deleted or no longer wants to be a part of my own tutor, we might need to go into this table and turn all of their values, any of their personal information, to null so that we can't know who the heck they even were. But in courses, the only thing that's tying this to the user is this user ID, and that's the user ID is it's not personal information. It's a 16-character string that was randomly chosen for that person. So we can actually say that this user ID is good to go no matter what. It never needs to be deleted. A second thing I'd like to say about this, though, is that you almost don't want to ever delete the user ID because imagine if I did. So imagine if I deleted a user ID from the course. That means I could never find anything related to that user ID again, right? So it's just not a great idea to ever delete your user IDs. Outside of the users table, we won't really be holding any personal information. Everything will just be tied to this user ID. All right, so the next value that we want to put in here is, let's go here, the title, and then we'll do description and then status. So let's say title, and we'll say type. This is going to be a string, so data types.string. It's going to be required, and we're not going to allow it to be null. We probably could enter some validation in here, like make sure it's alphanumeric, but I don't really want to do that. We might actually have special characters in our title. Who knows? Would be weird, yes, but it's entirely possible. No need to over-validate. We're going to have a description, and this is going to be a type data types.string as well. Okay, required. I'm going to say false. I say we don't actually need a description, and we are going to allow it to be null. So the reason I'm saying this is just because, yeah, I don't think that a description needs to be required. If I want to, I'm going to let it be a blank. And then status. So status. Now, full warning here. You could actually branch this out. So let's look at this. Status for me, I'm going to put it as a string. You could branch this out so that there's actually a status table that holds all of your different statuses, and this is just a status ID. That's not uncommon. So there would be one table, it's a status table, and it literally holds the statuses for all of your everything. So anytime you have like a status variable, it's pulling an ID from that table. I'm not going to do that because I don't see any reason to do that at the moment, and I'm a big fan of trying not to plan too far in the future for this, because then you're writing and trying to prepare for stuff that doesn't exist yet. So for the moment, status is just going to be a string. It's going to be required, and we're not going to allow it to be null, just like the title. We probably could do something like enumerate it, so say that its values have to be, what were the values I had? So say that its values have to be draft, published, or unpublished, but in all honesty, because it's a string and not just a foreign key in another place, I'm not going to do that. If you do decide to go the same route as I am, where you have string values in here, you do kind of have to be very consistent. That's one of the reasons why a lot of the times it's pulled into another table and then just a foreign key is placed in here, so that you don't really have the same ability to be consistent versus non-consistent. So just a warning, if you are going to do the string value like me, you do need to be consistent with how you are naming these things. All right, so that's good. That's all we need for this. Let's change this up here to courses, or sorry, course. Let's do courses. It'll auto pluralize it, but courses makes sense. It doesn't really make sense to be like course. Well, db.course.create, db.course.find all. Okay, yeah, I can see that. So it'll be the course table, but I'm going to output it as course. Sorry, it'll be the courses. It'll pluralize it, but I'm going to output it as course. And that's it for that one. All right, let's create another file now, models, and actually, real quick, I'm going to save this. All right, so now let's add a new file, and we will call this course history. Okay, and I'm going to take the course file, and now we really do have a good reason to copy it, because it is literally the same thing, except we're going to call it course history. It'll be interesting to see if it changes this to course underscore histories. I hope not, but it might, and I guess if it does, does. The good thing about whether or not it changes it is it's rare that we actually access that course table name directly. All right, if we look at course history, we see that we have all of the same values, except we also have a version on the course history. So we will add that, and version is just going to be an integer. So version, we'll say type equals data types dot integer, and required equals true, allow null is false, default value is 0. All right, and why do we want to give it that default value? Remember that we said that when a course first gets created, it should also create a version along with it. Well, actually, yeah, it should create a course along with it. And that course version should start out as 0. So the only time we should be creating a new entry at 0 is when we're creating a new course. Otherwise, this should not be 0, but we are going to set its default value to 0. Alrighty, so that is all good to go there. Now what we need to do is set up the relationship. As you can see here, these two courses are tied together, and although I don't have it pointed out here, we do see that there is a foreign key for the user ID in both tables. So we need to also tie this to the user table. So real quick again, let's get back in our editor. We're going to go into the index page, and we should have right up here our associations. Right now we just have an association between the user table and the permissions table. Let's create the I can't speak. Let's create the two tables here. So remember that I always do this in alphabetical order. That way it's easy for me to remember where things are. So we'll say courses, and then we will say course history. So courses, let's see here. Now, remember we said that there are two methods. Actually, let's go back to here. There are two methods that we do for this. Technically, there are three, but we'll say there are two. So there's has many and belongs to. The third one that you use less often is the has one, which is the same as has many, except it just means there can only be one entry in that table for that specific association. So has many is basically like when we say that a table is going to be entered into this table as a foreign key, right? So we know that the permission ID is entered in the user's table over and over and over again, depending on what permission that user has. The same thing, if we look here, occurs for courses in course history. Okay, no matter what, the courses table doesn't have a foreign key from the course history table. but the course history table does have a foreign key from the courses table. So we would say that courses, so db.courses, or course, remember that we exported it as a singular. So has many db.course history. Okay, it's as simple as that. And then we would say that course history, so db.course history dot belongs to and db.course. Just like that. Now we need to tie these things to the user table. Well, we see that both of these tables have an entry as a foreign key in them from the users table. So we would say db.course.belongs to db.user. And I'm going to do the same thing for course history. So db.course underscore history dot belongs to db.user. And I see an error here. Okay, there we go. And then the db.user has several permissions. I usually put my has many on top of my belongs to. So db.has user dot has many db.course, and then db.user.has many db.course underscore history. Just like that. And that will set up all of the associations that I need. All right, so let's confirm that that actually worked by starting up our server. So I'll run npm run. What is the command to just start up the server? All right, so we want debug. Okay, any second now. It's actually paused. There we go. All right, so that will run. We'll see it go through. Whoop, okay. So course history dot belongs to called with something that's not a subclass. So course history dot belongs to. So db.users. Okay, there it is. db.user, not db.users. I will say that that's kind of an unhelpful error message. Like, oh, by the way, one of the belongs to that you have written doesn't match what it actually needs to be. Like, I feel like it should tell you, hey, we tried setting up this specific association and we failed miserably, but unfortunately it doesn't. So we'll restart that, or it'll restart for us. And all right, we're good to go. So now let's refresh our tables. Or I don't need to refresh, I just opened them. But now we see, okay, so it does change it to histories. That's interesting. So course histories and courses. If we look at these, we see that course has all of the things we wanted, and it has a user ID that's in bold, meaning that it is a foreign key. Okay, if we look at course histories, we see that it has all of the same things, but it has a course ID, and it has a, where is it? Status. No, sorry, version. Now, here's something you might have noticed. I just noticed it myself. we did not write course ID in here. So how did it get there, right? So if we look at course history, we'll go through here and we don't see a course ID. I did not write that in there. Well, that's the association. It automatically placed the foreign key in there. And I think that I actually did write that in here. I did. I just didn't include it in the model. I am going to put it in the model here real quick. So we'll say course ID. It's perfectly fine to edit your course like this or your model like this after it's been created in the database, so long as it actually matches what's in the database. Remember that unless we put a force on our sync, it will not destroy the table that's already in the database or edit it in any way on recreation. If we look at the code that gets run, we see right there in big blue letters, create if not exists. So it's only going to create a new database if it doesn't actually exist. So we'll say, whoop. All right, so foreign key from course table. And then I'm just going to go into the courses table and grab this to make sure that it is exactly the way it should be. And required is true. Allow null is false. All right. So we could technically run this and save it again. It would look, even if we did recreate our table, it would look exactly the same. So we're not going to do that. All right, so now we have both of these created. In the next video, we will start the scaffolding to actually create our route and then start creating our methods that will check our body, make sure that nothing is unique, or that make sure that everything is unique, and start dealing with statuses. That's going to be kind of a big thing. And yeah, we will get all to that in the next video. I'll see you there. Bye.
I can't stop time for you.